The moment the words left Prince William's mouth, the room reportedly went still, not because of what he said, but because of what it revealed. For years, the inner circle of Queen Elizabeth II had been defined by silence, loyalty, and an unspoken understanding. Some things were simply never discussed in public. Not personal matters, not private decisions, and certainly not anything involving the Queen's personal estate. But this was different, because this time it wasn't just a quiet family matter. It was a revelation, a detail that, if true, could explain years of subtle dynamics inside the royal family, unspoken tensions, quiet alliances, and the rise of one woman who never asked for attention, but somehow earned something far more powerful: trust. At the center of it all is a figure many once overlooked: Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, a woman who never chased headlines, never fought for the spotlight, never tried to outshine the institution she married into. And yet, behind palace doors, she may have become one of the most important figures of all. Because according to growing reports and royal insiders, Queen Elizabeth II didn't just value Sophie. She trusted her, perhaps more than almost anyone else. And that trust may have taken a very personal form, an inheritance, not a public one, not the kind announced in official statements, but something private, something deliberate, something meant only for someone the Queen believed would understand its true meaning. So why Sophie? And more importantly, why not Queen Camilla? To understand that, you have to go back, not to headlines, not to speculation, but to the quiet moments that shaped the Queen's final years. Because while the world watched the monarchy evolve, something far more subtle was happening behind the scenes. A bond was forming, and it wasn't built on power. It was built on presence. Unlike many who enter the royal family, Sophie didn't grow up inside privilege shaped by centuries of protocol. She had a career, a life, a sense of normalcy that made her different from the very beginning. And perhaps that's exactly what the Queen saw. Not someone trying to fit into the system, but someone who understood it without needing to change it. Over time, that difference became something rare inside the monarchy: reliability. While others attracted headlines, controversies, or constant media attention, Sophie remained steady, consistent, quietly effective. And for a monarch who had spent decades navigating crises, change, and public scrutiny, that kind of presence wasn't just appreciated. It was valued deeply. There are stories, small ones, almost insignificant on the surface, that reveal just how close this relationship became. Private conversations, shared interests, moments of laughter away from cameras. At one point, Sophie reportedly convinced the Queen to sit down and watch The Crown, a dramatization of her own life. It's the kind of detail that might seem trivial until you realize what it represents. Comfort, ease, a relationship that had moved beyond formal titles and into something far more personal. And then there were the deeper connections, shared discussions about military history, long conversations that stretched beyond royal duties into genuine curiosity. Even moments where Sophie would visit places a queen could no longer travel to and describe them in real time, almost as if bringing those experiences back to her. That wasn't obligation. That was connection. Over time, that connection evolved into something even more significant: dependence. Because as the monarchy faced one of its most challenging periods, internal divisions, public scrutiny, shifting roles, Sophie remained exactly what she had always been: steady. While tensions between Prince William and Prince Harry played out on a global stage, Sophie stayed out of the noise. While controversies surrounding Prince Andrew cast long shadows, she continued working without distraction. While the institution itself began to feel the weight of modern expectations, she adapted quietly, without resistance. And in doing so, she became something the monarchy desperately needed: a stabilizing force. But stability doesn't always make headlines. It doesn't create viral moments or dramatic narratives. And maybe that's why Sophie's influence remained largely unnoticed by the public, even as it grew stronger behind the scenes. Until now, because if the reports are true, if Prince William did reveal the existence of a private inheritance meant specifically for Sophie, then this isn't just a story about money or assets. It's a story about meaning. Because in the world of royalty, what is left behind matters just as much as who receives it. And sometimes more. An inheritance isn't always about value. Sometimes It's about trust. And that's where the story takes a more complicated turn. Because within the royal family, every decision, no matter how personal, carries weight, symbolism, implication, and yes, sometimes tension. For Queen Camilla, the journey into the royal family was never simple. Her relationship with King Charles III began under intense public scrutiny, shaped by controversy and years of criticism. Over time, that perception changed. Acceptance grew. Her role became official. But acceptance and trust are not always the same thing. Trust, especially in the eyes of Queen Elizabeth II, was something earned slowly, carefully, and never assumed. So if Sophie was chosen, if she was given something private, something meaningful, then the question isn't just why. It's what that choice represents. Because inside the monarchy, gestures speak louder than statements, and silence often says more than words ever could. Yet despite all the speculation, one thing remains clear. Sophie never positioned herself as a central figure. She never sought influence, never demanded recognition. And maybe that's exactly why she owned it. Today, as the monarchy continues to evolve under King Charles III, Sophie's role has become more visible than ever. No longer just a quiet presence in the background. She is now part of the foundation holding everything together. Her relationship with Catherine, Princess of Wales, has grown into something resembling genuine friendship, natural, relaxed, almost effortless in a world defined by formality. Her connection with Prince William remains strong, built on shared responsibility and mutual respect. And even in more distant relationships, she maintains balance, calm, control, because if there's one thing Sophie understands better than most, it's how to exist within the monarchy without being consumed by it. And that may be her greatest strength of all. Not power, not status, but stability. So when you hear about her secret inheritance, it's easy to focus on the mystery, the drama, the speculation. But the real story might be something far quieter. A final gesture from a queen who spent her entire life observing, evaluating, and understanding the people around her. A decision not based on titles or expectations, but on something far more human, trust. And maybe that's why this story continues to resonate. Because in the end, it isn't really about what was left behind. It's about what it says. About loyalty, about character, about the kind of person who doesn't need to stand in the spotlight to become indispensable. And as the royal family moves forward into an uncertain future, one question remains. Not who holds the crown, but who quietly holds everything together. Because the truth is, stories like this don't survive on facts alone. They survive on what people feel they reveal. And what this story suggests, whether officially confirmed or not, is something far more powerful than a simple inheritance. It suggests intention. Because Queen Elizabeth II was not impulsive. She didn't make personal decisions lightly. Every gesture, every private choice, every quiet act carried meaning. So if something was set aside for Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, it wasn't random. It was deliberate. And that's what makes this moment so compelling. Because within the royal family, nothing exists in isolation. Every action creates a ripple. And sometimes, those ripples reveal more than the action itself. Think about it. In a family where hierarchy defines everything, where titles dictate position, where tradition shapes identity, what does it mean when someone outside the direct line of succession is singled out in such a personal way? It challenges assumptions. It reshapes perception. And quietly, it shifts influence. Because influence inside the monarchy isn't always about rank. It's about access, trust, and proximity to the person at the very center of it all. For years, that person was Queen Elizabeth II. And if Sophie truly held a place closer to her than most, then that changes how we understand the entire dynamic of the modern royal family. It suggests that behind the official structure, there was another layer, a more human one, where loyalty mattered more than legacy, where consistency mattered more than charisma, and where the quietest person in the room could hold the most weight. But with that kind of position comes something else, responsibility. Because once you become someone the Queen relied on, that role doesn't simply disappear. It evolves. And that's exactly what we're seeing now. As the monarchy adjusts to life under King Charles III, the spotlight has naturally shifted toward the future, toward Prince William, toward the next generation, toward what comes next. But while attention moves forward, stability often comes from those who remain constant, and Sophie has become one of those constants. Not loudly, not dramatically, but consistently. In moments where tension could escalate, she steadies the atmosphere. In situations where relationships feel strained, she maintains balance. And in a family where public perception can shift overnight, she remains remarkably unchanged. That kind of presence is rare. And inside an institution as complex as a royal family, it's invaluable. Which brings us back to the central question. Not just what was given, but why. Because if there truly was a private inheritance, something meant only for Sophie, then it may not have been about material value at all. It may have been symbolic, a gesture that said, "You understand. You've been there. You can be trusted to carry this forward." And that idea changes everything, because it suggests continuity, not through titles, not through ceremony, but through character. And perhaps that's a quiet message at the heart of this entire story, that the future of the monarchy won't be shaped only by those who stand at the front, but also by those who support it from behind, those who don't seek recognition, but earn it anyway, those who don't demand attention, but command respect. And in that sense, Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, may represent something the monarchy has always needed, but rarely acknowledged, a different kind of strength, one built not on visibility, but on trust. Still, the speculation continues, the questions remain, and the silence from official sources only adds to the intrigue, because in a world where every detail is usually managed, controlled, and carefully released, silence stands out. It creates space for interpretation, for curiosity, for stories like this to grow. And maybe that's part of why this narrative has captured so much attention, because it sits at the intersection of two powerful forces, what we know and what we believe. But as with many royal stories, the truth may never be fully confirmed, and perhaps it was never meant to be, because some things inside the monarchy are not designed for public understanding. They exist quietly, privately, and only reveal themselves in fragments. Moments like this, revelations that feel small on the surface, but carry enormous weight beneath. So whether this inheritance was financial, symbolic, or something else entirely, its impact is already being felt, in how people view Sophie, in how they interpret her role, and in how they begin to question the deeper dynamics of the royal family itself. Because sometimes it only takes one detail, one unexpected revelation, to change the entire narrative. And if this moment has done anything, it's that it has shifted the spotlight, not toward scandal, not toward controversy, but toward a figure who has spent years avoiding both. And in doing so, it raises one final question. In a monarchy defined by tradition, what happens when the most important person isn't the one wearing the crown? And yet, even now, something about this story doesn't sit quietly, because the more you think about it, the more it lingers, not as a confirmed fact, not as a verified announcement, but as a possibility that feels almost too fitting to ignore. Because if anyone inside the royal family were to be trusted with something deeply personal, something intentionally kept away from public view, it would be someone exactly like Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, not the most powerful, not the most famous, but the most dependable. And that distinction matters more than most people realize, because a monarchy has never just been about power. It has always been about preservation, of legacy, of image, of continuity. And preservation doesn't come from bold moves alone. It comes from quiet consistency, from people who understand the weight of the institution and choose to carry it without complaint. That's where Sophie's story becomes something larger than this single moment. Because long before any talk of inheritance, long before speculation began to swirl, she had already proven something essential, that she could be trusted not just with responsibility, but with restraint. And restraint, inside the royal family, is everything. It's what keeps private matters private. It's what protects relationships from public damage. It's what allows a monarchy to survive even its most difficult chapters. So if a private gesture was made, if something was given, acknowledged, or passed on quietly, then it would only make sense for it to be placed in the hands of someone who understands that silence is not weakness, but discipline. And that perspective adds another layer to this story. because suddenly the focus shifts away from who was left out and toward who was chosen. Because being chosen in this context isn't about favoritism. It's about confidence. It's about knowing that whatever is entrusted will be handled with care, with discretion, with loyalty that doesn't need to be proven publicly because it has already been proven privately. And that may be the most important detail of all. Because while headlines focus on tension, on the idea that Queen Camilla could be frustrated, or that divisions might exist, the deeper story is about alignment, about who naturally fits into the rhythm of the monarchy and who has had to adapt to it over time. And those are two very different things. Adaptation can be successful, it can be accepted, it can even be embraced. But natural alignment is something else entirely. It's instinctive, effortless, and often invisible to the public eye, until a moment like this brings it into focus. Because suddenly, people start looking closer, re-evaluating past moments, reinterpreting interactions, noticing the subtle dynamics that were always there but never fully understood, the quiet conversations, the shared glances, the unspoken ease between certain members of the family. All of it begins to take on new meaning, and in that process, Sophie's position becomes clearer, not as someone competing for influence, but as someone who never needed to, because influence, in her case, was never about visibility. It was about proximity. And for years, her proximity to Queen Elizabeth II placed her in a unique position, close enough to observe, close enough to support, and ultimately, close enough to be trusted. That kind of trust doesn't happen overnight. It isn't granted because of titles or expectations. It's built slowly, through consistency, through reliability, through showing up again and again without needing recognition. And that's exactly what Sophie did. While others stepped in and out of the spotlight, she remained. While narratives shifted, she stayed the same. While the monarchy faced waves of change, she became part of what kept it steady. So when people ask why her, the answer may be simpler than it seems. Because she was there, not just physically, but emotionally, consistently, reliably, and in a life defined by duty. That kind of presence is rare. But here's where the story takes an even more interesting turn. Because as much as this moment reflects the past, it also points directly toward the future. Because now, the question isn't just what Sophie meant to the Queen. It's what she will mean to the monarchy moving forward. Under King Charles III, the royal family is already evolving. Fewer working members, more focus roles, a sharper emphasis on efficiency and purpose. And in that environment, individuals like Sophie become even more valuable because they represent continuity, not in title, but in approach, in understanding, in the ability to navigate complexity without creating more of it. And perhaps that's why her presence feels more noticeable now than ever before. Not because she has changed, but because the monarchy around her has. As pressures increase, as expectations grow, as public scrutiny becomes more intense, the need for steady, reliable figures becomes impossible to ignore. And that's where Sophie stands, right at the center of that need, quietly, without announcement, without spectacle, but undeniably present. So whether or not this secret inheritance is ever officially confirmed, its significance may already be clear, because it has sparked a conversation that goes far beyond one private decision. A conversation about trust, about loyalty, about what truly matters inside an institution built on centuries of tradition. And in that conversation, Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, has emerged as something more than just a supporting figure. She has become a symbol of stability, of discretion, of a different kind of strength, the kind that doesn't demand attention, but earns respect over time. And maybe that's why this story continues to resonate, because in a world that often rewards noise, there's something powerful about quiet influence, something compelling about someone who doesn't need to prove their value, because it's already been recognized at the highest level. And as the royal family moves forward, navigating challenges, changes, and an uncertain future, that kind of presence may become more important than ever, because in the end, crowns may define authority, titles may define position, but trust defines everything. And sometimes, the most important legacy isn't what is left behind, but who it is left with. And in the end, when the headlines fade, when the speculation quiets, and when the noise surrounding this story finally settles, what remains isn't the mystery of a secret inheritance. It's the meaning behind it. Because if there's one thing Queen Elizabeth II understood better than anyone, it was people. She had spent a lifetime watching, listening, and quietly deciding who could be relied upon when everything else felt uncertain. And in that world, where loyalty is tested in silence and character is revealed over time, very few ever reach that inner circle. Fewer still remain there. But Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, did. Not through power, not through status, but through something far more rare. Consistency. And maybe that's a real story here. Not a dramatic fallout, not a royal rivalry, not even a hidden gift, but a quiet recognition of someone who never needed the spotlight to prove her worth. Because while others were shaping the future in front of the world, Sophie was helping hold it together behind the scenes. Steady, unshaken, unnoticed, until now. And perhaps that's why this moment feels so significant. Because it reminds us that inside even the most powerful institutions, influence doesn't always belong to the loudest voice. Sometimes it belongs to the one who simply never stopped showing up. So whether this inheritance was real, symbolic, or something that will never fully be revealed, its message is already clear. Trust was placed where it had been known. And that kind of trust is never accidental. As the monarchy moves forward under King Charles III, facing new challenges, new expectations, and a rapidly changing world, one question quietly lingers. Not just who will lead, but who will steady the ground beneath them. Because history will always remember the ones who wore the crown. But the future may very well depend on those who stood beside it. And in that quiet, unshakable space, Sophie's story is only just beginning.